What's going on, Imperials? Sun and Moon are fantastic games. I've absolutely loved traveling around a brand new, vibrant region filled with fantastic new characters to travel with, and the return and revitalization of some old favorites. It really does feel like Pokemon is getting better each and every generation, and getting closer than ever to an immaculate blend of intriguing storytelling and balanced gameplay. I've already certainly played Pokemon Sun much more than I should, so I've been able to take in a majority of what the game has to offer. And for all the wonders and hidden secrets, there are just a few small things that stand out in the games that, if tweaked, could have made the games perfect. That's not to say that the games are bad, they're still full of fun, and they made more than enough money, so I'm sure Game Freak knows what they're doing. There are just some small things that, if put into the games, would have, in my opinion, made them flawless. So, here are just a few of the missed opportunities I saw in Sun and Moon. Number 6. No National Dex. This one is not all that major, but it is annoying. For whatever reason, the Pokedex in Sun and Moon only goes to 301, and does not register any more Pokemon than that. Every other game has a regional dex, but after it was completed, it would be expanded to include all available Pokemon. This is not the case in Alola. Even though you can encounter numerous Pokemon that are not in the Pokedex, I suppose they'll just remain an anomaly forever. I don't understand the reasoning behind this in the game or in real life. Is it just because the Rotom Dex has a hard time remembering that many Pokemon? I can do it. If that's the case, I'll just give it back and get a regular Pokedex. The Kalos one was basically just a sheet of glass and it had twice the memory space. I know that you can access the National Pokedex through the Pokemon Bank, but sometimes I'd like to access my Pokedex without Wi-Fi. This entry is largely personal, because I had almost every single Pokemon before Sun and Moon came out. I was only waiting for the distribution of Meloetta to have the completed Pokedex, but Sun and Moon came out before I got her, so I never officially completed the entire Dex. Now that I have a complete Generation 6 and Generation 7 Dex, having every Pokemon from Bulbasaur to Magearna in my PC boxes, I can't even look at my achievements. It would have been so simple just to leave the National Dex the way it's always been, but instead they made all my hard work feel like a hollow victory. Number 5. Hordes and Triple Battles. Horde battles were introduced in X and Y, where 5 Pokemon jump out of the grass at once to attack. This was an interesting feature, with some Pokemon only appearing in certain hordes, and also being a means of hunting for a shiny Pokemon more quickly. All in all, I liked Horde battles as a mechanic, adding a little freshness to the tired old gameplay. Of course, they borrowed the layout of these battles from triple battles that were introduced in Black and White. Generation 3 introduced doubles, so the next logical step is triples, right? These types of battles were a bit harder, and don't even get me started on rotation battles. While not major additions, triple battles and hordes were sure to be mainstays in the Pokemon games for generations to come. Except for when Sun and Moon came out and they were nowhere in sight. Seriously? I can't imagine they were that unpopular. Certainly not as bad as HMs, but at least Surf and Fly are still moves in the game. I really enjoyed horde battles every so often. It's not like they would happen all the time. I know they have SOS battles now, but it's not the same, especially as a means of shiny hunting. Horde battles were so much faster, and you could potentially have a break in between each one. If someone was hurt, you could use a quick discharge and head back to the Pokemon Center, instead of having to pack endless supplies of potions, and revives, and elixirs, and plenty of people with False Swipe. I'm not asking for it all over. Even just select areas of the map that alternate with SOS battles would have been fine with me. And I don't really love triple battles or anything, but to not have them in the game at all? Anywhere? What, is that not a thing in Alola? Is it considered unsportsmanlike? It didn't even have to be mandatory, just an option at some out-of-the-way battle chateau or something, just in order to make the game feel more complete. Plus, wouldn't it have been cool to have the option of a battle royale with 6 people? I think so, but the mere option wasn't afforded to us. It just seems like you lack confidence in the product when you sweep things like this under the rug and hope no one asks questions. Number 4. Backtracking. I've gotta say, Alola is much bigger than I thought it would be from the initial images. I didn't see how a whole game could be played across these tiny-looking islands, but size can be deceiving. As it turns out, there were actually maybe a bit too many areas in the games, because some places were so far out of the way that you wouldn't find them unless you were specifically looking. A fantastic PokeTuber, Birdkeeper Toby, made a video all about some of the forgotten and hard-to-get places in Alola, and he's right. This game seems to blow by a number of interesting locations without creating much incentive to go exploring on your own. Take the desert, for example. You come from the city up the route to an oasis right in front of the desert, and they say you can't go in until you complete the trial. You then go out to the next route with the Pokemon Center, down to the trial area, do the trial and meet the Mimikyu, then immediately get told that you have to go to the Ether House. And by the time you're done, you've completely forgotten all about the jerk that locked you out of the desert. I know this because that's exactly what I did. Only after I had gone to the Battle Tree did I realize I'd never been to the desert. And there's some valuable stuff in there. There's some expensive items laying around up for grabs. The Psychic Z crystals in there, apparently some spacemen, and oh, you know, just an island guardian. This isn't the only example of this. Once I accidentally stumbled across the Seaward Cave, I came out to explore the bay area underneath and was rather underwhelmed. There were about 5 medium rarity items for my reward, for basically volunteering to take on as much work as uncovering the Freemason treasure. It's almost like they didn't want me to go down there. By no means am I saying that every little thing should be on the rails, but I would have liked some encouragement to explore areas more thoroughly. Look at Diamond and Pearl. Those games are also on rails, but they heavily focus on going back through previous areas, only now with more tools and experience to find secrets that you couldn't before. Alola just hasn't seemed to hit that balance of trying to create secrets, but actually rewarding the player for discovering them. Number 3. The Safari Zone. Now, I'm not saying that we have to go back to the old method of doing things. Throwing 20 balls at a Chansey only to have it flee anyway will always be infuriating, and we don't need that. But after 2 generations of no Safari Zone, we got an overhaul in Oros, where the encounters became just like wild battles. Now that is something I could get behind. To me, Alola just gave off a vibe more than any other region that they would have some pretty extravagant nature preserves, especially since Pony Island is said to be relatively uninhabited by humans. There could easily have been a Safari Zone place out in the Pony Plains. Like any other, this Safari Zone would have Pokemon that can only be encountered here, something with which the game is already familiar, with Pokemon locations being more specific than ever before, down to the patches of grass. There is literally 1 tree in the entire Alola region that Emolga lives in. I don't know what is so special about the ecosystem of that 1 tree, but if that doesn't sound like a Safari Zone material, I don't know what is. The way Alola has been set up also lends itself to the Safari Zone being the one place in the game that you could have caught the regular forms of the Alolan variants. If the Pokemon were imported, it would make sense that there could be a Fire Vulpix inside. Alola is also perfect for another idea I had swimming around for the Pokemon games. Being a tropical island paradise, Alola would be the perfect place to have an island entirely devoted to fossil Pokemon. That's right, I'm talking full-on Pokemon Jurassic Park. Alola could be the one place in the world with a climate similar enough to their own that they managed to survive and continue on in the wild. It may even be that over time they adapted to new circumstances and managed to change types, meaning that you could have Alolan forms of various fossil Pokemon. You wouldn't have to have all of them, and it could just be a small area, but it would be such a great addition to the game. And the worst part is that they hinted at it by the guy who resurrects your fossil on Route 8. What would be the harm in letting that guy fulfill his dream and in the process fulfill all of ours? Number 2. References. Sun and Moon came out in the year of Pokemon's 20th anniversary, and they knew that it would cause a big stirring in fans. The first trailer for Sun and Moon showed all the games in sequence, listing off the years they debuted, and then said this year would be where it all comes together, and then revealed the titles. Well, that was all the marketing they had to do because the fans went nuts over it. More and more details kept coming out, like Alolan forms for some of our old favorites, and interactions with some of the more iconic characters in the franchise. It seemed like they were going to make good on their promise of it all coming together. Then the games came out, and we all got enthralled in the wonders the Alola region had to offer. Only when the dust settled a bit did it come to mind that maybe there weren't as many references as we thought there'd be. Apart from a hearty battle outside the tree, there was little interaction with Red and Blue, something that was heavily emphasized in the later trailers. It was spectacularly fun, to be sure, but maybe not as crucial to the overall game as we were led to believe. Alolan forms are great, but it turns out they were only for Generation 1 Pokemon. I understand that they have the biggest curve to try and keep up with, but surely there are some Johto Pokemon in need of just as much attention. While they did a fine job acknowledging other parts of the globe, they didn't really seem to deliver on the all comes together promise. It was almost reminiscent of Generation 5, which seems to be the most isolationist generation to date, meaning that comparatively, Unova has far less interconnectivity to other regions than we become accustomed to. Generation 5 seemed to suffer in that regard, but I don't believe the case was that drastic in Alola. Just a few more Easter eggs here or there really could have impacted the game in the way they were advertising. I may simply be forgetting, but I don't believe there was even an appearance by anyone from the Johto region. Its entire cast of characters were just left by the wayside. I'm not saying they had to put one in, but if Grimsley can make the cut, it couldn't hurt to throw Claire in there for a second. It didn't even have to be much. Maybe just a scene of all the different professors coming to congratulate you on the beach for the first ever Alolan champion. It would take little to no effort to get them all in the same place, and then they would literally all come together just like they had advertised. Again, the game did have a number of good references, but as far as the way they were promoting the games, it didn't seem to quite deliver on that hype. I wouldn't have even thought of this if they hadn't brought it up, so they said it, not me. Number 1. Insufficient new Alolan forms and new Pokemon in general. Alolan forms are great additions to the Pokemon games. It's something that had crossed my mind before, but I never thought they'd actually do it, because it was much too Digimon to me. I mean, you've got Greymon, Metal Greymon, Skull Greymon, Geo Greymon, War Greymon, Black War Greymon, Burning Greymon, Emperor Greymon. I just never thought that Pokemon would venture into alternate forms of established characters. Although, after they already did Warp Digivolving, DNA Digivolving, and Biomerging, I shouldn't have really been surprised. Before the games came out, they had released about a dozen or so of these remixed creatures in order to capture our imaginations, and it worked. A problem people had with Oros was that they revealed every single new Mega Evolution before the game ever came out, so there were no surprises left. With the small number of Alolan forms they released, we knew they couldn't be seeing all of them, which was accurate because we saw all but 3? Wait, are you serious? The only ones left for the actual game were the Geodude family? Where were all the rest? We should be getting just as many Alolan forms as we did Megas in X and Y. And speaking of X and Y, they introduced the fewest number of new Pokemon in any generation to date. There are a number of potential reasons for that, either because they had to take so much time rendering all of the other previous Pokemon into the new 3D format, or they just spent too much time developing creative input for the Mega Evolutions. X and Y shook things up in format and functionality enough that the smaller number of new Pokemon was not so glaring that it distracted from the game. However, it was understood that once that monumental transition was overcome, the developers would resume producing their standard number of original Pokemon. At least it was understood by the fans, but I guess that message never got to the developers because they promptly did not do that. Sun and Moon introduced a whopping 80 new Pokemon, which is more than Kalos had, but still far less than the average. Even if you included all of the Alolan forms in the total, which I don't, but for the sake of argument, it still falls short of the average. And if you include all of the Mega Evolutions in the total from Generation 6, then this latest batch is the least amount of new Pokemon ever. Why is that? If anything, they should have doubled the new Pokemon from X and Y, because they simply imported all the existing 3D sprites from the previous games. So while they had to do half the work they normally do, they only added a handful more of unique Pokemon than when they had to do twice as much? Where was all that creative prowess going? I know they made some changes to the standard tropes in the game, but that shouldn't have taken away so much that it had to skimp on the very purpose of the franchise. An exciting new feature like Alolan forms should be introduced with a bang instead of wondering why we're left wanting more. And a new set of games should be just that, new. Sun and Moon are doubtlessly fun, but the blatant underutilization and sheer lack of new Pokemon was an enormous missed opportunity. Those are just some of the tweaks that I would have made to Sun and Moon. What are some of the changes that you would make to the games? What are other missed opportunities that you saw? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. We'll see you around next time.